All right, you ready to learn some After Effects? Let's hop over in and we're gonna go ahead and boot up After Effects. And once it's done loading, you should get a splash screen menu that looks something like this. I'm using After Effects 2021. If you're using something slightly different, don't worry, it shouldn't really affect what we're doing today. If you've already opened up After Effects and your interface already looks different than this, we're gonna go ahead and reset our workspace to the default by clicking up here, clicking this little doobly-doo, and click Reset to Saved Layout. And then it should look something like this. Over here, we have the project window. This is where everything that you use in your project is going to stay. So you'll have your images, you'll have video, you'll have your compositions, which we'll learn about later. It's all gonna live in this panel. Now inside a project, you create what is called a composition. You can do that here at the beginning of the project by clicking New Composition, or later on, you can go down here to this little button down here and click Create a New Composition. So this is where all of your animation is going to happen. It's like a little tiny mini project inside your main project. You can have lots of these inside one project and you will often use a lot of them. We're gonna go ahead and set the settings here. We're gonna call this My First Animation. We're gonna make sure the width and height are set to 1080 by 1080. We're gonna set the frame rate to 24 frames per second. The start time code, we'll leave at 0. And the duration, we're gonna just make this 10 seconds by changing here and make sure this matches here. Then the last thing, background color, make sure yours is set to black. That won't really affect anything, but if yours is different, it might look different than mine and you might get confused. Okay, now we have a composition. So our composition shows up here in the composition viewer, and then we have down here what is called the timeline. So with everything, you can click and drag and move these things around, but this timeline space is where your layers for your composition will go. Everything that is in here is going to show up here. Now, what does that mean? I'll show you. We're gonna go ahead and create a text layer by right-clicking in here, clicking New and Text. And then we're gonna type your name. So my name happens to be Chris Zachary, but your name probably is not that, so you should type something else. We have now a text layer that shows up here, and you can adjust your text settings over here in the character panel. And this is another area of After Effects where you can have all these different settings. The character panel is where you adjust your text. Paragraph, you can left, center, or right align, and then adjust your text type. We're gonna make this, we'll just make this bold Helvetica and make it look nice. So now we have a nice clean text layer. We're gonna create a background layer now. So if we right click, we do New Shape Layer, and it's gonna create a blank shape layer. Now a shape layer is just a container for shapes. And I'll show you what that means by clicking this rectangle tool up here. This area is called the toolbar, and it's where your tools are. And excuse me, dog. We're gonna draw out, if you hold shift, it'll make a square. We're gonna draw out a nice big rectangle. Now, this isn't a perfect background yet, but we're gonna make it that. So if we click our shape layer, we can go up here and we can change our fill color to something that is nice and blue. Now we have a blue box, and it currently is blocking our text. So this is how After Effects works. It uses layers that are stacked in a certain area and then layer on top of each other, where you see them up here in the composition window. And this layer order, this 1, 2, it goes from top to bottom, and it's very important. So anything that is underneath in the timeline will be underneath in the viewer. If that sounds kind of confusing, don't worry about it. If you just poke around in After Effects, if you just follow through this course, it will make sense pretty quickly, and you'll start to get more familiar with this currently unfamiliar territory. Okay, so now that we have this rough background layer, if we hit enter while the layer is selected, we can rename it background. As you can see inside the shape layer, there is the contents and there is this rectangle. So this rectangle is this rectangle. And if we twirl down, we can see the settings of the rectangle. So here inside rectangle path, we have the size, and I'm gonna go ahead and change this size to 1080 by 1080. If you remember, we set our composition, our project, to be 1080 by 1080, so this makes it the same size as the background. And then we're going to go down here into the transform for rectangle 1. This is basically the position settings for this actual box. We're gonna go ahead and set the position to be 0, and then tab over, hit tab to go to the next property, and hit 0 again. Hit enter to close that, and you'll see our rectangle perfectly fits the background. That might have been a lot of work to get a simple background in here, but I wanted to show you how shape layers can have a shape inside them, and then the shape has its own settings, and then the layer itself has its own settings. If we look at this text layer, we're gonna go ahead and do our first animation. So we'll twirl down into the transform properties here, and we can see we have scale, which adjusts the scale of the layer. We have position, we have the Y position on this side, and the X position on this side. We have rotation, and we have opacity, which shows the opacity. I'm gonna reset all of those so it goes back to the beginning, and we're gonna set some keyframes. What are keyframes? Keyframes are how you animate in After Effects. It's basically a little shape that says, at this point in time, equal this value. Now, what does that actually mean? I'll show you. If we go down into our composition, we see this playhead here. Now this scrolls across time. So here we're at 0 seconds. Here we are at 3 seconds. You can see that right here, and you can see that right here. You can also see that right here. I'm going to go to 1 second here, and I'm going to click this little stopwatch next to scale. Clicking that stopwatch turns on animation for that layer. So now we have a little diamond shape that showed up right here at 1 second that says the scale equals 100%. Now if we go ahead to 2 seconds and we drag this up to say 191 or whatever number you pick, it will automatically create another keyframe that says at 2 seconds equal 191. Now, if we drag between these, you can see that After Effects animates the scale between 100 and 191. So if we grab our playhead, a little playhead bar here, and drag it to the beginning, we can hit spacebar, and you have just animated your first animation. And I know this seems a little simple, but it's really all that there is in After Effects. There's a lot of obviously additional complexities and things that we'll continue to learn and things that you will be learning for the next 10 years. But the essential basics of After Effects are layers and keyframes and saying, do this at this time, then do this at this time. Okay, one last thing before we stop talking about interface. This is the most important thing that I'm gonna show you today, and the most important thing that you'll learn in the rest of this series, and that is the graph editor. So if we click this little icon here, we see this weird looking area called the graph editor. Now the graph editor is how you take your animation from being stiff and ugly to being smooth and professional. Now this might look a little weird and scary and all this stuff kind of just feels bizarre, but don't worry, I'm gonna show you how to use the graph editor and exactly how to make your animations feel smooth in a later video. Okay, so let's recap. We learned about the basics of After Effects. We learned about the workspace. We learned about the project panel where you store everything, the composition window where everything shows up, and the timeline where you animate and make all your layers. And then there's all the different toolbars and panels throughout. That's what you need to know. You also created your very first After Effects animation, so congratulations. If you want to keep clicking around and familiarizing yourself with the interface, feel free to do that. You could try animating something like the text position, having it go off screen and then on screen, something like that. But if you're ready, let's head over into the next video where we're going to start working on our class project.